Hi, Kai Rosga here. Welcome back to the weekly wrap-up brought to you by Decoded. This week's updates on the latest in tech regulation will include TikTok's issues in the US, a spat between Facebook and Apple in Europe, and Nvidia's acquisition of ARM. As a reminder, this is not legal advice and the views expressed are my own. So let's get started with TikTok. As a quick refresher, there was an executive order essentially banning TikTok, which became the subject of a legal dispute between the administration and TikTok. The reasons for the order were data security concerns about the use of user data on TikTok by ByteDance, which is TikTok's Chinese-owned parent entity. And the order was essentially seen as forcing a sale of TikTok's US operations. Microsoft, Walmart, and Oracle appeared with some expressed interest. However, China imposed a rule that was going to restrict the ability of selling the AI technologies that TikTok has over to a US-owned company. And that spurred another chaotic week of activity in the saga. And it culminated in essentially Microsoft dropping out of the running and Oracle and Walmart emerging as the potential partners for TikTok. The details of the transaction are still not entirely clear. It's some sort of technology partnership, as they call it. The term sheets that have been disclosed to the public so far include no sale of US operations of TikTok, no transfer of control of US operations, and it will involve Oracle running the tech operations for the US entity of TikTok. And that would include tracking the use of user data and the use of algorithms used to target users with videos. So essentially, Oracle would be acting as a sort of data cop for the US operations. Walmart's role is less clear. And one other term that has sort of emerged in the public discussions is that the US entity would be run by an independent board, which would require its members requiring board government approval to be appointed to the board. The US administration gets the final say here, and the latest news is that it appears that the US administration has signed off preliminarily on the current deal and will not go through with banning TikTok from the US market. However, it looks like those details still have to be worked out, so we'll have to wait and see. So why does this matter? Well, it's interesting to see international relations spilling over into the business and legal world in tech. This is all against the backdrop of course, a broader trade war, which last year tracked into the tech space when the US administration essentially banned Huawei, a smartphone manufacturer, from access to the US market and US suppliers. And now it's playing out in the form of not only the saga regarding TikTok, but also a ban of WeChat, which is a huge Chinese app used for chat, for social media, for payments, and really massively popular in China. And that will now no longer be accessible in the US. All reflects a sort of digital protectionism or perhaps even a digital Cold War emerging between the US and China. Other areas in the world will certainly be implicated as well, as some might have to choose sort of which technology giant to partner with. Might see a fracturing or decoupling, as some call it, of the internet between a US version and sort of a Chinese version. So a very difficult and uncertain legal and business landscape emerging for the tech space. Practitioners will surely want to keep this in mind because they might impact deal decisions and deal negotiations and deal clearance. But it also might impact working with suppliers and customers across the countries. So that's it on TikTok. We'll have to wait and see what happens next, since every week it's been something different. Next up is some scrutiny of the App Store that's come from an unexpected place, which is Facebook. in responses to a public consultation on the EU's Digital Services Act, which is a law or a set of regulations that the EU is working on that would impact the digital economy. In response to requests for public consultations or comments on that law, Facebook submitted some answers to questions about challenges that they faced with online platforms. And as part of those responses, Facebook referenced the unfair contractual terms and unfair practices imposed by Apple on the iOS, which is the operating system that runs on the Apple smartphone devices. The claims from Facebook include that Apple has prevented Facebook Gaming, which is an app that Facebook has been working on, from offering playable games apps through the App Store. So essentially, Facebook is saying that Apple is constraining the distribution of other platforms that might offer apps on the App Store itself. And in addition, the suggestion is that this is done to sort of protect the App Store from competition and to protect the commissions that Apple earns when apps are distributed through its App Store. The other claim or complaint that Facebook has raised involves unnamed, so that means not specifically the App Store, but unnamed app stores generally, and restrictions that they have been imposing on the collection and use of data on apps. And the claim is that these restrictions are limiting the effectiveness of the ads that app developers can place on their apps, which is undermining the ad-based revenue model that fuels much of the app ecosystem. Again, the suggestion is that this is done to protect Apple's own, the undisclosed App Store's own in-app purchases, which again generate commissions for the companies that run those app stores. And so specifically, we're probably by implication talking about the Apple App Store as well as Google's Play Store and other large platforms like that. The complaints from Facebook track what we've seen in the US in the lawsuit filed by Epic Games against Apple. In that lawsuit, Epic Games, which offers, among others, the super popular Fortnite game, has been alleging that Apple has restricted the distribution of apps for the iOS outside of the App Store, and also that Apple has been preventing in-app purchases without the use of Apple Pay. And so there's some parallels we're seeing on the US side with the Epic lawsuit, and in Europe with these comments that Facebook has provided in response to the DSA public consultation period. It's a rare moment to see the big tech giants publicly opposing each other in a sort of regulatory context. Until now, companies have largely managed to stay out of each other's ways when it comes to regulatory issues like this. So you have to ask the question, what does it mean? Is this sort of a start of a new zero-sum phase in tech? Some have commented that tech companies, and in particular consumer platforms, can't rely on expanding their user base forever. They also can't rely on grabbing an increasing amount of attention from their existing users. And so they need to find new ways to grow revenue. So you have to wonder whether this is sort of part of what's going on with Facebook's comments about the Apple App Store. And in particular, Facebook says in their comments, quote, "Mobile games are the most lucrative category of mobile apps worldwide." So again, suggesting that this is a major revenue source that these companies are thinking about, and this might start playing out in contentious ways going forward. The other implication of this little spat is that it suggests that data protection and antitrust laws might be on a sort of collision course. Apple has been known and has branded itself as a company trying to protect data security for its users. And it's certainly expected to use data privacy and data protection rules as a tailwind for those efforts. By contrast, Facebook business model focuses on collecting data from users, including, ideally, it would like to collect data on Apple users that use, for example, Facebook's apps on Apple. And so as we see in the claims that Facebook has now made to the commission, this could lead to complaints under the antitrust laws. And that in itself might create a sort of tension between the enforcement of antitrust principles on the one hand and the rationale behind data protection rules on the other. Lastly, last update has another deal update. US-based Nvidia is announced that it will acquire UK-based ARM in a $40 billion deal. Nvidia makes semiconductor chips. ARM licenses the technology used in those chips. And the antitrust implications here are not horizontal, meaning it doesn't look like there's any direct head-to-head competition between these two companies, but there are concerns being raised about vertical or conglomerate effects, as people call them in the antitrust space. And that arises from the fact that Nvidia, again, makes chips using technology licensed from ARM. And most of ARM's licensees, other licensees, are competitors of Nvidia. So that raises a couple of antitrust questions that the authorities will be looking at. One, is there an incentive or possibility that after the acquisition, Nvidia forecloses its chip-making rivals who are dependent on ARM for their licensing of technology? And two, would Nvidia have an incentive to exclude its chip-making competitors by bundling ARM licenses with other licenses that Nvidia offers as well, thereby making it more difficult for a competitor who doesn't have access to both of those as a bundle or can't offer them as a bundle from competing effectively against Nvidia? So those are the questions that the authorities will be looking at. It looks like the CMA, the UK Antitrust Authority, will be taking the lead here. And lastly, outside of the antitrust context, there's another hint here of sort of the digital protectionism that I just talked about in the context of TikTok and WeChat, which is that commentators have talked about what are the implications of U.S. ownership of a company who has a lot of Chinese customers, because some of ARM's licensees are China-based companies who might be concerned that as a result of this transaction and maybe further trends in sort of the digital trade war, might they see their supply source cut off if there's some sort of action by the U.S. administration against Nvidia after the transaction with respect to their licensing to Chinese companies. So tech world continues to become more complicated and more chaotic from a sort of regulatory landscape. And this week is very much like other recent weeks in that regard. Thanks for watching. For more on the latest in the efforts to regulate the tech digital revolution, check out my website, techlawdecoded.com, or follow me on Twitter @KaiRozga. Otherwise, see you next time.